Have you ever felt an unsettling presence in someone? Something you couldn't quite explain, but your body knew to fear it? Maybe you've met someone who was calm on the surface, but carried an invisible intensity that disturbed the room. It's as if their silence wasn't peace, but pressure, like something was about to erupt. What if I told you that this is no coincidence, and Carl Jung believed this trait was the most dangerous sign a person could carry? That's what we'll explore in this video. A psychological abyss that once recognized could protect you or expose what's still sleeping inside you. Have you ever noticed how some people always seem perfectly fine, calm, collected, pleasant, yet something in their presence makes your nervous system whisper, "Something's wrong"? That's no accident. That's the mask, the persona. Carl Jung warned us, the persona is not who we are. It's who we pretend to be so we can survive, belong, be liked. It's the smile we wear when we want to scream. It's the politeness that masks exhaustion. It's the calm voice that says, "I'm okay," while the soul behind it is on fire. The persona begins innocently. As children, we learn what is rewarded: silence, helpfulness, success, strength. So we perform. We become who we must in order to be accepted. But slowly, painfully, we start to forget that it's an act. And when the world claps, we assume we've done well, without realizing what we've lost in the process. You think you're strong because nothing affects you. You think you're mature because you stay calm while being disrespected. But what if I told you? That's not strength, that's suppression. The danger begins when the persona hardens, when it becomes a full-time role. Jung said, the persona is a compromise between the individual and society as to what a man should appear to be. But when you forget it's a compromise, you begin to think you are the appearance. And here lies the psychological trap. The more successful you are at maintaining the mask, the more dangerous you become to yourself and to others. Because what you refuse to feel doesn't disappear. It collects, it stores, it seethes, and when it erupts, it doesn't come out as healing. It comes out as chaos. Think of someone who always pleases, never complains, never breaks down. When that person finally collapses, the damage is never small. Repression makes you explode in places and ways you never expected, often on the wrong people, at the wrong time, for the wrong reasons. You've seen this, maybe in yourself. The real issue isn't the mask, it's the attachment to it. When you fear being disliked more than being false, you have already begun to burn, and the mask only accelerates the fire. So what can be done? Awareness. Jung believed that transformation begins not by tearing off the mask in violence, but by recognizing its function. By asking, what have I been trying to protect? Whose approval have I been performing for? What part of me have I silenced to be accepted? This is the first crack in the surface. The moment where you stop applauding your control and begin to question your captivity. Because wearing the mask too long doesn't protect you. It imprisons you. And the longer you wear it, the more dangerous the eruption will be. So I ask you this. Who are you when no one is watching? Who would you be if the mask fell? Now let's look deeper at something far more subtle. Why emotional calmness might not be peace at all, but the echo of something long buried. Why do the quietest people often leave the deepest scars? There's something haunting about someone who never reacts, never argues, never raises their voice, but whose silence weighs like a storm about to break. And yet, society applauds this silence. We call it maturity, discipline, peace. But Jung would disagree. He believed that emotional stillness, when not rooted in consciousness, is not peace. It's paralysis. It's not serenity. It's suppression. Because when emotions are not expressed, they don't disappear. They sink. And what sinks begins to rot. You may know someone like this. Maybe you are someone like this. You keep everything inside. You say you don't want conflict, that you don't care anymore, that it's not worth reacting. But your body knows otherwise. Your tension, your insomnia, your random outbursts. They are all symptoms of what is buried alive inside you. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious does not forget. It stores every unmet need, every swallowed emotion, every betrayal we never acknowledged. The unconscious is not a graveyard. It is a pressure cooker. And stillness, when rooted in fear or repression, only tightens the lid. The real danger lies in how this stillness is misread. People assume you're okay. You never complain. You never confront. You never cry. But that's exactly what makes the wound so dangerous. It festers in isolation, invisible to the outside world, and eventually, it erupts. And when it does, it's not a whisper. It's an implosion. Stillness becomes strategy. You begin to associate silence with safety, emotion with exposure, expression with weakness. But in doing so, you slowly disconnect from yourself. You become a stranger in your own skin. You stop knowing what you feel. You only know what you shouldn't feel. And here lies the core of the problem. You've mistaken numbness for strength. But numbness is not power. It's distance. Distance from others, from truth, from yourself. Jung believed that emotional energy, if not consciously integrated, returns in darker forms. What isn't processed becomes projection. What isn't healed becomes habit. The silent person, when pushed far enough, becomes volcanic. Not because they are cruel, but because they were never allowed to feel. So what is the way forward? Presence. Not silence, but conscious presence. You must begin to notice what you feel without judging it. You must learn to sit with discomfort without fleeing into stillness. You must give your emotions a voice before they become screams. Because stillness is only beautiful when it is the result of inner resolution, not inner suffocation. You may think you're doing well because no one sees you break. But what if I told you that your silence might be the very reason you thought of you never truly healed? Let's look closer now at the shadow that lives behind this silence. Because the absence of noise does not mean the absence of danger. Sometimes the person who never speaks is the one whose shadow speaks the loudest. And now, we need to confront that shadow directly. Because what you won't see in yourself, you will start seeing everywhere else. Let's go further in. Why do some people trigger you more than others, without even trying? Why does a certain kind of arrogance, sadness, laziness, or intensity provoke something so strong in you that it feels personal, even when it's not? Carl Jung had an answer for this. He called it projection, and it is one of the most dangerous signs of all, because it reveals the parts of yourself you refuse to face. The shadow, according to Jung, is everything you have disowned in yourself, every impulse, trait, desire, and emotion you've deemed unacceptable. Not because they were evil, but because, at some point, you were told they were wrong, too loud, too sensitive, too much, so you split. You buried those aspects. You became the good one, the strong one, the quiet one. But the shadow didn't die. It just went underground. And here's the truth. Whatever you reject in yourself, you will see more clearly in others. This is why judgment can feel so addictive. You think you're defending morality or logic, but you're actually defending your ego from the mirror that someone else unintentionally holds up. The person you hate for being selfish, they reflect the part of you that's never allowed to want. The one you envy, they reflect the part of you that was taught it's wrong to shine. This is why Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people never use that irritation as a gateway. They react, they blame, they cut people off, they label them toxic, broken, or delusional, never stopping to ask, why does this affect me so deeply? Because asking that would require turning inward and facing what you've buried. And yet, until you do, you remain a puppet of your own shadow. You believe you're reacting to others, but in truth, you're reacting to the part of yourself you have never made peace with. Here lies the greatest danger. Unintegrated people become dangerous not through malice, but through projection. They start wars with others to avoid the war inside themselves. So what's the path forward? Confrontation, but not with the world, with your own reflection. Next time someone triggers you, pause. Instead of saying, "They're wrong," ask, "What part of me feels threatened? What part of me have I abandoned that now returns through them?" This is not weakness. This is radical responsibility. And it's terrifying, because it removes all your excuses. But it's also the beginning of liberation. Because once you integrate the parts of yourself you used to reject, they no longer control you from the dark. You stop reacting. You stop projecting. And suddenly, people lose the power to hurt you, because they no longer represent what you refuse to face. So the question is no longer, why do they bother me so much? The real question is, what is their presence waking up inside of me? Let's go deeper still, because now we must look at a different mask, one far more subtle and far more corrosive. The mask of constant kindness, the persona of perfection, the smile that suffocates. Why do you keep smiling when something inside you is screaming? Why do you nod, agree, accommodate, when every cell in your body wants to say no? You've been taught that being nice is good, that being liked is safety, that keeping the peace is noble. But what if I told you that chronic niceness is not compassion, it's self-erasure, and that behind every compulsively nice person there is a storm of repressed emotion waiting to be unleashed? Jung warned us that any extreme behavior, even those praised by society, is often a compensation. And compulsive kindness is no exception. Because when your boundaries are weak, your smile becomes a weapon, not against others, but against yourself. You say yes when you want to say no. You agree when you disagree. You forgive before you've even felt the pain. That's not healing, that's bypassing. That's moral suffocation. And here is the paradox. The nicer you become, the more resentment you carry. Because deep down, you know it's a performance, a mask you created to stay safe, loved, accepted. But the price is devastating. You begin to betray yourself in real time, over and over again. You become polite when you're angry. You become helpful when you're exhausted. You become agreeable when you're grieving. And it doesn't stop there. Eventually, that unspoken rage turns toxic. You may not yell, but you withdraw. You may not accuse, but you resent. You may not explode, but inside, something begins to die. Your authenticity. Carl Jung believed that kindness becomes violent when it's disconnected from truth, when it serves the persona instead of the soul, when it's used to manipulate how others see you, rather than reflect who you truly are. And make no mistake, chronic niceness is a form of manipulation. Not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being seen without the smile. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you deny your darkness, the more it bleeds into your light. You become a shell of calm with a core of bitterness. You become nice, but you are not free. So what now? Radical honesty, not with others, yet with yourself. Ask, who taught me that saying no would cost me love? When did I learn that my feelings are dangerous? Why do I believe that being liked is more important than being whole? Because the real danger is not in being disliked. The real danger is being loved for someone you're not. So you have a choice. Keep hiding behind kindness until the bitterness consumes you, or face the discomfort of becoming real. Niceness is easy. Truth is sacred. And now we go even deeper, into the quiet war between control and collapse. Because what you call strength might just be a refusal to feel. Do you pride yourself on being calm in every situation? On staying silent when others shout, unshaken when others fall apart? The world will praise you for it. They'll say you're composed, mature, strong. But strength without sensation is not resilience. It's repression. And what you call control may in fact be the refusal to feel. Carl Jung warned us, what we push down in the name of composure doesn't vanish. It waits. Beneath the mask of calm, the psyche stores every unshed tear, every silenced scream, every tremor we refuse to let rise. And that stillness It is not peace. It is pressure. There's a fine line between emotional mastery and emotional numbness, and most people have no idea when they've crossed it. You say, "I've moved on." But you still flinch when their name is mentioned. You say, "I'm not affected." But your body holds tension like a graveyard holds secrets. You say, "It doesn't matter." But your dreams betray you every night. This is the deception of emotional control. It's not that you don't feel, it's that you no longer allow yourself to. You have trained your nervous system to override every signal, but healing never happens through avoidance. It happens through presence. Jung believed that the unconscious does not accept silence as closure. The emotions you refuse to process become psychic clutter, manifesting as anxiety, chronic fatigue, or sudden outbursts you can't explain. The very control you're so proud of becomes the prison you can't see. Here is the paradox. Real power is not found in the absence of emotion, but in your ability to contain it without denial, not suppress. Contain, to sit with it, to let it rise, to let it speak, without letting it rule. Emotional maturity does not mean staying neutral in chaos. It means allowing the chaos to pass through you without destroying you. And that's a kind of strength no one claps for, because it happens quietly, internally, without applause. But it's the only kind that lasts. So ask yourself, what am I not allowing myself to feel? What am I trying to master that actually needs to be mourned? Whose voice am I trying to silence in myself to appear composed in front of others? Because pretending not to feel is not strength. It's fear, dressed up as discipline. And you will never access your full power until you let the storm in, not to drown in it, but to understand what it came to wash away. So here's your invitation. Stop trying to stay above it. Sink into it, not recklessly, but consciously. Because only when you descend fully into your own feeling, into the wound, the rage, the grief, can you begin to rise as someone who is no longer pretending to be whole. And now we turn our attention to a subtler form of control, the one that hides behind helplessness. Because not all manipulation is loud. Some of it whispers through silence and victimhood. Have you ever met someone who seemed utterly harmless, soft-spoken, fragile, agreeable? Yet somehow they controlled every dynamic around them, not through anger, not through aggression, but through guilt, through silence, through helplessness. Carl Jung taught that power does not always scream. Sometimes it pleads, sometimes it withdraws, sometimes it cries at just the right moment to keep you from leaving. And this is a truth few dare to confront. Victimhood can be a mask and a weapon. You've likely been taught that manipulation comes from dominance, from those who impose their will. But the most subtle form of manipulation comes from those who refuse to express their will at all. Instead, they make you responsible for their well-being, for their moods, for their survival. And before you know it, you're editing your words, lowering your voice, sacrificing your needs, because they can't handle it. This dynamic isn't always conscious. In fact, it rarely is. Jung would say this is the shadow's way of controlling reality without confronting it. Instead of saying, "I want," the powerless say, "You hurt me." Instead of saying no, they say, "I guess I'll just be alone again." It's not strength that's missing, it's ownership, it's presence. And if you're the one who uses this strategy, if you find yourself constantly overlooked, hurt, unchosen, ask yourself, what part of me has learned to suffer out loud in the hope of being rescued? Because here's the brutal truth. Learned helplessness becomes emotional currency. And eventually people withdraw, not because they don't care, but because they are exhausted from trying to carry what you refuse to hold for yourself. Jung believed that psychic energy is always seeking expression. If it cannot move outward in empowered action, it turns inward or sideways. It becomes passive aggression, guilt-tripping, subtle sabotage. You may not realize you're doing it, but the people around you feel it. So what can we do with this? Responsibility. Not in the moral sense, but in the energetic sense. Ask, where am I avoiding conflict by playing small? Where am I expecting others to feel for me what I want, to allow myself to feel fully? Where have I confused collapse with authenticity? Because suffering does not make you right. Helplessness does not make you innocent. Silence is not purity. It can be pressure. The shadow of powerlessness is dangerous not because it shouts, but because it whispers through guilt, clings through fear, and binds through unspoken contracts. If I stay weak, you'll stay close. But true intimacy doesn't come from dependence. It comes from sovereignty. And that requires stepping out of victimhood and saying, I am not here to be saved. I am here to rise. Now, we need to examine a deeper layer still, where all this repressed energy begins to turn. Not outward, but inward, into implosion, stagnation, depression, into the haunting weight of the unlived life. Have you ever felt a heaviness that had no name? A fatigue that sleep couldn't cure? A restlessness you couldn't outrun? It's not just burnout, not just sadness. It's the life inside you that you refused to live. Carl Jung warned us, what you do not bring to consciousness appears in your life as fate. And perhaps the most dangerous fate of all is not failure, but unlived potential. Think of all the dreams you silenced, the anger you swallowed, the passions you deemed impractical, the truths you abandoned so others could stay comfortable. They didn't vanish. They sank. They became weight. They became sadness without a story, rage without a name, numbness that crept in like fog. They became symptoms you now medicate, pathologies you try to manage. But the truth is simpler and more brutal. You are haunted by the life you did not choose to live. Jung called this the undiscovered self, the parts of you that remain dormant because the persona, the mask, decided who you were allowed to be. And every time you said no to your authentic self, you created a fracture within, a tension, a wound, and like all energy, it didn't disappear, it mutated. This is the core danger. What is unlived does not die. It becomes distorted. It seeks expression elsewhere, in drama, in obsession, in depression, in the sabotage of what's working, just to remind you what's missing. You wonder why you're always restless, always disappointed, always tired of almost everything. Because you're not tired of life. You're tired of a life that isn't yours. And yet, the soul remains loyal. It keeps knocking, through dreams, through envy, through the quiet ache when you see someone else doing what you silenced in yourself. So the question becomes, what part of you have you exiled in order to be acceptable? The artist you buried in favor of being rational? The wild voice you silenced to stay nice? The joy you postponed because suffering made you feel worthy? Jung saw individuation, the process of becoming whole, as a reclaiming of what was left behind. Not by force, but by listening, by honoring the symbols, the fantasies, the longings that never made it to the surface. So what's the path forward? Permission. Permission to feel the ache fully, not to wallow, but to understand. Permission to rage, not at others, but at your own betrayal. Permission to dream again, not recklessly, but honestly. Because only when you admit what you've abandoned can you begin to reawaken it. And no one can do this for you. No amount of applause, security, or external success will soothe the pain of a life unlived. The energy has to move. It doesn't care about your excuses, your busyness, your fear. It came here for a purpose. And until you fulfill it, it will haunt you. Now let's descend even further into a deeper paradox. That those who seem most passive may be the ones whose unclaimed shadow becomes the most explosive of all. Why is it that the most passive people sometimes erupt with the most destructive force? They never argue, they never resist, they let everything slide, until one day they don't. And when that moment comes, it shocks everyone, sometimes even themselves. But Carl Jung would not be shocked. He would say, that which we do not confront within, we will meet outside as fate. And passivity, when driven by fear instead of peace, becomes the perfect breeding ground for a violent shadow. On the surface, these people seem kind, flexible, even selfless. They say yes before you finish the question. They never complain, never impose. But underneath that smooth exterior, something stirs. Unspoken resentment, suppressed desire, stored rage. The more someone avoids confrontation, the more they internalize the tension that would have been released through healthy conflict. And make no mistake, energy must move. If it cannot move outward, it begins to rot inward. And what rots eventually erupts. You may know this in yourself. You stay silent through 100 moments that hurt you. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. You choose peace over truth, again and again, until one day the smallest thing pushes you over the edge, and the eruption feels bigger than the moment, because it is. It is not the coffee spill. It's the years of swallowing your voice. It's the decade of unmet needs. It's the identity built on being agreeable. Jung believed that passivity, when rooted in avoidance, is not humility. It is fear of self-confrontation. It is a refusal to feel one's own power, one's own rage, one's own desires, because acknowledging them would force change. And change is terrifying when you've built your entire worth on being easy to love. But here lies the danger. The more you deny your aggression, the more it builds in the dark, and the darker it becomes. It moves from conscious frustration to unconscious sabotage. You start harming not through action, but through withdrawal. You punish with silence. You manipulate with guilt. You hurt without touching. The shadow does not need violence to be violent. It only needs silence. It only needs you to keep saying, "It's fine." So what's the way out? Courage. Not the kind that starts wars, but the kind that ends your internal one. The courage to say, "I'm angry, I'm tired, I have needs, and I'm done hiding them." Because you were not born to be pleasant. You were born to be whole. And wholeness includes your fire. There is nothing noble about shrinking to be acceptable. There is nothing sacred in turning your power against yourself. Passive people become dangerous, not when they feel too much, but when they've been numb for too long. Because when their shadow finally speaks, it doesn't whisper, it screams. Let's now enter that scream. Let's examine how the repressed shadow doesn't just explode once, but returns again and again, seeking revenge for every time it was silenced. Do you ever wonder why certain patterns keep repeating in your life? Almost like the universe is punishing you for something you done, even remember doing. You try to move on, but the same betrayals find you. You try to heal, but the same wounds reopen. Different faces, same pain. Carl Jung didn't call this coincidence. He called it compensation. The psyche's revenge for what you refuse to confront. Because what you repress doesn't stay quiet. It reorganizes your reality. The part of you that was silenced, abandoned, humiliated, doesn't forget. It becomes a hidden architect, reshaping your desires, your fears, your choices. Not consciously, but through sabotage, addiction, obsession, illness, and fate. That's the revenge of the repressed. It shapes your destiny while you sleep. You think you're choosing your partners, your career, your friends. But what if you're being chosen by your unresolved wounds? What if the life you're living isn't freedom, but a carefully camouflaged reenactment of your earliest pain? The unconscious seeks resolution, but when it can't find it directly, it seeks repetition. That's why you fall for the same kind of person. That's why your successes feel empty. That's why every step forward is followed by a mysterious fall. The part of you that was repressed is not passive. It's plotting your awakening through pattern and pain. And the longer you delay that awakening, the more brutal it becomes. Jung believed that neurosis is often the soul's last-ditch attempt to be heard. When dreams fail, when intuition is ignored, when emotions are suppressed, the psyche revolts. And it doesn't care if it destroys your career, your relationship, or your health in the process. Because from its perspective, collapse is better than silence. Pain is better than numbness. Crisis is better than stagnation. So what's the path forward? Illumination. Not analysis, not control, not bypassing. You must make the repressed conscious, not by dissecting it, but by feeling it, by listening, by surrendering to what it has been trying to say all along. Ask yourself, what is this sabotage trying to show me? Whose voice still lives in my silence? What pain keeps begging to be witnessed? You are not broken, but you are divided, and every split part is crying for reunification. The revenge of the repressed is not punishment. It's a call to wholeness, a call to stop pretending that the past is over just because you no longer talk about it. Until you answer that call, you will repeat, and repeat, and repeat. Not because you're cursed, but because your soul refuses to be silenced any longer. Now let's look at what happens when this repressed pain doesn't just sabotage from within, but draws in others who mirror exactly what you still refuse to integrate. Because the safe person you run to might be the one who slowly undoes you. Why do we so often fall for those who feel safe, only to be slowly undone by them? There's a kind of person who never raises their voice, who always listens, who seems incapable of harm, and you, exhausted by chaos, wounded by intensity, run to them like a refuge. But what if that safety isn't real? What if it's not peace, but absence? Carl Jung warned that our unconscious attracts exactly what we need to confront. And sometimes, what looks like salvation is merely a mirror. The safe person you're drawn to may not be stable. They may simply be suppressed, repressed, fragmented. Just like you, you feel protected by their calm, but it's not calm. It's emptiness. It's detachment disguised as maturity. It's the same silence you were raised on, now in someone else's body. And here's the dangerous part. This dynamic feels familiar. That's why it's seductive. You tell yourself, they don't hurt me like the others did. No, because they don't touch you at all. They become a space where you can hide from your own pain, a canvas onto which you project your longing, your unmet needs, your desire to finally be seen. But they cannot hold it. Not because they're bad, because they're unconscious, because they are also hiding. You attract each other not from wholeness, but from avoidance. And over time, the relationship becomes an echo chamber of unspoken wounds. You grow resentful because they won't open up. They grow passive because your emotional depth terrifies them. And neither of you realizes the safety you built together is actually a shared fear of being real. Jung believed that unconscious partnerships are destined to collapse or stagnate, because projection always expires. Eventually, you see the person beneath your fantasy, and it hurts. Not because they betrayed you, but because they never were who you imagined. So what now? Radical clarity. Ask, am I drawn to this person because they restable, or because they don't challenge me? Am I safe here, or just unseen in a new way? Because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who abuse you. They're the ones who help you stay asleep, the ones who never ask you to grow, the ones who enable your numbness, the ones whose silence lets you avoid your truth. It's not their fault, and it's not yours. It's the unconscious seeking safety where it should be seeking wholeness. Love without awareness becomes escape, and escape always turns into entrapment. So before you surrender to comfort, ask yourself, is this love, or is this hiding? Because nothing is more seductive than the illusion of peace, until you realize it cost you your awakening. And now we arrive at the turning point. What happens when we stop projecting, stop hiding, stop reaching outward for answers, and begin the dangerous descent inward? That's where integration begins. What happens when the illusions collapse? When you finally realize no one is coming to save you, not the safe person, not the silence, not the mask. It's terrifying and liberating, because that moment where everything falls away is not the end, it's the beginning. Carl Jung called this sacred unraveling the path of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not who you had to be to survive. This is not healing in the conventional sense. It's not about feeling better. It's about becoming whole. It's about turning inward, gathering the exiled parts of yourself, the rage, the longing, the shame, and saying, "You belong." And here's the paradox. You don't transform by fixing yourself. You transform by facing yourself. The shadow is not evil. It is forgotten power, repressed life force, authenticity that was once dangerous, now waiting to return as strength. And until you face it, it will continue to act from behind the curtain, through sabotage, through reactivity, through distorted relationships. You may think you're broken because you feel so deeply, but Jung would say, you feel because you're still alive. Because yourself, the totality of who you are, is trying to emerge through every breakdown. The path is brutal, because everything that made you lovable in the eyes of others, the pleasing, the calm, the sacrifice, must now be questioned, not discarded, but reclaimed in a new form. You're no longer the child who had to be silent to be safe. You're no longer the lover who had to dim your light to be chosen. You're no longer the friend who had to stay small to be included. Those roles were masks, beautiful, necessary but temporary. Now, you walk a different path. One that does not guarantee comfort, but offers something far more sacred, inner authority. You begin to feel what you feel without justification. You begin to speak without filtering your soul. You begin to act not from approval-seeking, but from alignment. And the world may resist this version of you, because this self cannot be controlled. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But privilege doesn't mean ease, it means responsibility. You must carry the weight of your own becoming. No more projections, no more fantasies, no more waiting for permission. Because from this point on, your pain no longer defines you. Your power does. You've entered the territory of inner kingship. The throne was never out there. It was always buried beneath the rubble of your denied self. So stand in it, not arrogantly, but sovereignly, not perfectly, but fully." And now, the final veil lifts. Because when you claim your power, the world does not cheer. It resists, it tests, it punishes. And you will face a final gate, the loneliness of liberation. Why is it that the moment you finally become whole, everything around you begins to shake? You would think clarity brings peace, that self-knowledge makes life easier. But the truth is far more unsettling. Becoming whole doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you incompatible with everything that was built on your fragmentation. Carl Jung warned us, the self, the integrated conscious totality of who you are, is not welcome in a world addicted to masks. The moment you stop performing, stop pleasing, stop hiding, you lose the comfort of belonging to systems that fed on your submission. You are no longer manipulatable, no longer reactive, no longer compliant. And that makes you dangerous, not because you wish harm, but because you refuse to lie. You'll notice it quickly. Your presence begins to expose people, not because you judge them, but because you no longer participate in the dance of denial. And when you stop pretending, you reveal how much others still are. This is the sacred danger of individuation. You become light, and light disturbs shadows. Not just yours, everyone's. People who once praised your gentleness will call you selfish. Those who depended on your silence will label you cold. Those who fed on your brokenness will say you've changed. And they're right. You have. You've stopped leaking energy into battles that weren't yours. You've stopped bending to stay acceptable. You've stopped mistaking peace for obedience. Now you walk differently, not louder but deeper. You speak slower, not because you fear conflict, but because your words now carry weight. You no longer chase love. You radiate it from a place no one can reach without truth. But it's lonely here, isn't it? Not because you're alone, but because few are willing to pay the price of this clarity. Few are willing to lose who they thought they were in order to meet who they truly are. So what now? You keep walking, not upward, not forward, inward, because the real journey never ends. Wholeness is not a destination. It's a commitment, a daily ritual of remembrance, of saying, I choose awareness. I choose truth over comfort. I choose self, fully and without apology. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But he also knew that terror is sacred, because on the other side of it is freedom. So ask yourself, are you willing to be feared in order to be free? Are you willing to be misunderstood in order to be whole? Because the path of awakening demands it. And the moment you choose it, you're no longer living someone else's life. You're no longer begging to be seen. You've become the witness. You've become the flame. You've become what no one can take from you, yourself. And if this entire journey has stirred something deep within you, don't stop here. Are you ready to lose others in order to stop losing yourself? Because choosing your peace is not selfish, it's sacred. And don't forget, the next video is also part of this journey. It's important. You need to keep going. Real transformation only begins when you don't stop at the first step. See you there.